Hello, welcome back. Okay, now we're going to talk about gender and social power and our biases between how we view gender. And the biases that we have can be really subtle, so it's interesting to pay attention. So I want to just briefly kind of paint the picture of the general understanding of male and female. And this does not mean that every man is this way or every woman is this way, but our general understanding. And then in class, we're going to have a discussion about how we feel about it. So generally speaking, men tend to, and if you want to follow along, this is slide 8. We'll go through slide 8 and 9. So men generally place more importance on power and achievement. Men usually talk more assertively. Men can dominate in leadership roles. They can dominate in politics. And they're successful in positions where it demands decision making. Men can be directive as leaders. They're very decision oriented. They're very, like black and white, yes and no, let's do it. And men tend to offer their opinions more readily than women. Now, on the other hand, women generally use their style of leadership is more democratic. So they bring in the opinions of the whole team to develop an understanding of what the decision is that needs to be made. And this can be a very good thing, indeed, because women tend to validate the perspective of all who are there, whereas men can tend to leave people out. And again, this is generally speaking. Women tend to smile and apologize more often than men do. Women can be less successful in leadership roles, but it's not because women don't have the ability. It's because many women haven't taken the responsibility or haven't chosen to walk that path. Most women express support rather than opinionated perspectives. And at times, women do receive less of a salary than men do in traditional roles. Now, men, generally speaking, are more independent. They play in large groups. They're more competitive. Conversations focus on problem solving. And this also can be problematic because some men they may not see the feeling or understand what's going on with the person, because they don't validate the experience. They just quickly move past the experience into the fixing or problem solving phase. So it can be productive, but at the same time not validating. And men tend to be more dominant and less expressive. So women, on the other hand, generally speaking, depend on each other more. They play in smaller groups. They have smaller groups and they have more intimate conversation. And women tend to be less competitive, and women tend to be less assertive, generally speaking. So we see differences early on when we're children between males and females. And again, they're much more fluid than they used to be. But in your book, it shows a picture of boys playing kickball in a muddy river, and they're very, very aggressive looking. And then it shows girls doing a craft kind of thing. Now, this is true some of the time, but clearly, like my niece played Little League football for a few years. And so we're seeing more fluidity here. But there is differences early on in gender roles. And we'll talk about what those differences are in class. Okay, so now let's just think critically. Again, I want you to just think about this for our discussion in class. So when we think critically about the biases we hold, or what between men and women in the workplace, or factors that contribute to this gender biases, what are our differences in perception? Like, what are men supposed to do versus what are women supposed to do? Often the one that I hear is men who are aggressive are viewed as powerful. They're viewed as a take charge kind of guy, somebody who should be a leader. And women who are aggressive oftentimes are viewed as mean or difficult or harsh. We do see differences in compensation. The statistic right now is about women make about 81.4% of the white male counterpart in the same position. Now, this isn't always the case, but it is the case some of the time. It is worse for minority women, and it is also minority men also face a racial pay gap between their white male counterpart. So these are areas where we need to become more conscious of our biases so that we can reframe those, so we can dismantle those biases. We do still see differences in childcare responsibility. While we're again becoming more fluid, men are taking more responsibility of childcare. Some men are single dads and they're the sole parent. But more often than not, women are still carrying most of the responsibility. Okay, so now let's move to slide 15. So we have X chromosome and Y chromosomes. We know this, right? So both men and women have X chromosomes. Women have 2 X chromosomes. Females have 2 X chromosomes. Male have 1 X and 1 Y. About 7 weeks after conception, a gene of the Y chromosome triggers the testes to develop and produce testosterone. So it's 7 weeks after conception that changes start to take place that make the fetus more male or more female. Now, during the 4th and 5th months, sex hormones in the fetus brain support male or female wiring. So in the 4th or 5th months, we're wiring our brains to either become a male or a female. Now, intersex is a term used by psychology and the medical field to explain when somebody they possess both biological sexual characteristics at birth. And this, as you can imagine, this would be very challenging because an individual is going to clearly struggle with where their sexual identity lies. And oftentimes sexual reassignment surgery is performed once the person has created a clear sexual identity. And we will talk about, in class, we're going to talk about a female long-distance runner who had higher than normal testosterone levels, and the agencies that the sporting world temporarily denied her participation in several competitions because they viewed her higher than normal testosterone levels as an unfair advantage for her to compete as a woman. So we'll talk about that in class because I want to know what your thoughts are on that. Was that fair? And what do you think? So now let's look at gender role. So role is a set of normal behaviors and expectations about a social position or how the person in that position should or ought to behave. For instance, a CEO should do this. A parent should do that. A mother should do this. A doctor should do this. So it's that set of normal behaviors that we use to define a person's parameters based on their social position. A gender role, on the other hand, is a set of expected behaviors and attitudes and traits based on being male or female, and this shifts over time. Gender identity is the sense of being male or female or some combination of the two. So gender identity is this thing that we have a perception from. It's how I identify myself. It's my perception from within. And now let's look at social learning theory. Social learning theory is that social behavior is learned by observing and imitating and by being rewarded or punished. So when we do this social learning theory by giving, boys trucks and girls dolls to play with, and again, we're becoming more fluid with this, and more parents are creating an opportunity for, kids to play with both kind of toys. But we still do, like, say, a little boy named Jeff, hey, Jeff, big boys don't cry. It's okay, you're going to be okay. And then we might say something like, Susie, you're such a good mommy to your dolly. So these are little ways that we inject this social learning theory. We create a reward or a punishment about this proper behavior. Now, transgender describes people whose gender identity or expression differ from that of their birth or biological sex. So people may align with their outward appearance people may align their outward appearance with their internal gender identity by dressing as a person of the other biological sex. Transgender is a more inclusive descriptor than transsexual because it includes the experience of those who pursue medical changes to affirm their gender as well as those who do not. So transgender is a more accepted term. And also, there is some stigma around the term transsexual because historically it was used to categorize transgender people as mentally ill. So psychology does not categorize any gender differeces as a mental illness or a deficit in any way, but psychology did at one time. So we've learned and grown. So transsexual still has that stigma connected to that. What we use now is we use the gender dysphoria is the current diagnosis used to describe what we're describing is the distress an individual might feel or experience as a result of having a gender that is different from their sex assigned at birth. So the diagnosis is wrapped around or it's framed around the client's experience of discomfort and anxiety. It's not around an illness or something being wrong with the disparity. Okay. So again, a transgender person who is biologically female may feel that a male identity is a better fit and take the following steps. She may use a male name instead of a female name. Use male pronouns instead of female pronouns. Dress as a man. Engage in activities that are typically associated with men in that culture. Or again, vice versa. This also happens vice versa. And we have probably the most famous transgender person in the media is the Caitlyn Jenner. And so she was on the box of Wheaties before transitioning to Caitlyn. And now she's on the cover of Vanity Fair, and I'll show you that picture in class. Okay. So our sexual orientation, we have homosexuality, heterosexuality, and bisexual. So as all of you know, homosexuality is gay or lesbian, heterosexual is straight, and bisexual is both sexes, where the person would be more fluid. Heterosexuality is the most common, and bisexual and homosexuality do exist in all cultures, even cultures that it's illegal. Okay, so just a few facts to show you where we've come. So in 1973, the American Psychiatric Association dropped homosexuality from its list of mental illnesses. So while that seems like a long time ago, it really wasn't that long ago. That would mean people who are like 45 or 50 would have been diagnosed with a mental illness for being a homosexual. And then in 1993, the World Health Organization did the same. So this is 1993. And then Japan did it in 1995, and China did it in 2001. So we can see that we still have a long way to go. It's moving in the right direction, but we clearly had some challenges to overcome. If we're calling gender dysphoria, if we're calling it a mental illness, we're definitely going to alienate people who identify with anything other than heteronorm as their sexual orientation. So it was a huge bias that we had to overcome, and we're still in the process of doing that. Okay. So again, I want to highlight that the diagnosis currently is gender dysphoria. And remember, this is the treatments are framed around the client's experience of discomfort and anxiety around the gender experience. It's not an illness because they experience this disparity. It's simply the disparity and that discomfort that arises from that. Okay, now we know that homosexuality is not linked to problems in the parent-child relationship. It's not linked to a fear or a hatred of the opposite sex. Levels of the sex hormone, homosexuals don't experience less testosterone than men who are not homosexual, and homosexuality is not linked to childhood molestation, seduction, or other sexual victimization. Okay, so now I'm going to invite you to watch 2 videos on LGBTQ+ and a hate crime thing, and then we're going to discuss this in class. So I'll see you in a minute.